Thank you, Lisa, for that lovely introduction, and welcome everybody to today's first day of the CEC 24 conference. I'm delighted to be the first plenary speaker for today's session, and would look forward to the next sessions of today and also tomorrow. So, look, today's talk from my perspective is to inject a fair bit of agriculture into the discussion and to talk about circular economy, just not from, I guess, a nutrient level, but to understand that what we're looking at in terms of circular economy, in my words, is to keep molecules at play. So it doesn't matter if it's around nutrients, but it's also energy. And it's another aspect that I'd like to inject in the conversation is the importance that renewable energy, particularly from a bioenergy perspective, actually plays in the circular economy, and one that is quite central in agriculture. So I just want to ask a question to you, and this is a farmer of the future who's out in the paddock in his tractor, and he's wondering, what life might be like without ever buying diesel again, without ever paying for electricity or even fertiliser. And so what all that basically involves is a circular economy, but also allows the farmer to be independent of any energy sources that he's currently drawing from, or she, for that matter. So does it exist? In certain countries it does. In Australia, we're not quite there yet at all, particularly from a transport point of view. But there are ways and technologies that's already being implemented, and that's what I just want to give you a glimpse of. To firstly understand where Australia is at in terms of bioenergy, having been in this space for now like 15 years, I guess, and to understand where we're at, Australia had produced its first State of the Nation report in 2018. So that's relatively recent. And for those of you who aren't quite over what the various technologies are across the bioenergy sector, they're quite varied. And it does take from a number of different biomass fuel sources, including agriculture, but also across municipal waste, and which includes wastewater, of course. But it also goes out to the forestries, including wood waste, and again into the agricultural sector, intensive livestock. And as well as, the biomass sources being very diverse, so too is the technology. And that's why, in my mind, the bioenergy sector is what I call the Swiss Army knife of renewables. And it's because not only is it quite complex in terms of the technologies, there's quite a number, from a biological standpoint, anaerobic digestion, from another biological is, biodiesel from transesterification, and of course fermentation to produce ethanol. And then there's the thermal technologies, which consider direct incineration, combustion, and then all the rest of the carbonisation, gasification, pyrolysis, and so on. So it can be a little misunderstood in terms of what it can actually do in terms of carbon reduction, but it's very important otherwise, because it can fill those various gaps of which wind or solar can't do. So too, in its diversity in technologies is its actual range of end products. And if we look toward just simply anaerobic digestion, it can produce electricity, and it's a very central component of wastewater treatment plants like Sydney Water, having combined heat and power, but also can be useful as a diesel replacement, or for upgrading of biomethane, so it's very important for vehicle fuel as well. The important component then, of course, is the residue that's left over from many of the bioenergy technologies, which is the digestate. So it's very nutrient-rich fertilizer, and also, in the carbonisation, or the pyrolysis gasification. Biochar is a very important fertiliser as well. So that's where, you know, we're at as a country, a nascent bioenergy sector. So there's a lot of room for actually implementing that in the various sectors. As I just alluded to, wastewater treatment plants pretty much represent the highest proportion of where AD is actually, or anaerobic digestion is implemented, and of course landfill gas extraction represents the highest portion of biogas extracted in Australia because we have a lot of landfills. So now I'm just going to go into what that central component is around the concept of energy independence. So moving away from Australia, looking a bit more high level, and then going into some international examples, I just want to spend the first few minutes around what this concept means. So I spoke about bioenergy as being that central component of being making a farm energy independent. But that's through the production of heat, electricity, clean water, and also, importantly, carbon dioxide, because biogas is made up of not just methane, but also CO2. That then itself means that you have a stabilised income because the farmer's not going to be utilising a residue, which would then otherwise be a liability, to actually then produce their own energy, which then becomes independent of any livestock prices, which change from season to season. And from that derived energy from their own waste means that they can generate electricity from and reduce their waste from manure solids, and in some cases can get credits for reduction of emissions in Australia, the AQs, and also gate fees. Again, I'm just talking about from a more general aspect, so it's not dependent on what country you're in. On the other side, you'll also get environmental solutions, which obviously comes in the form of greenhouse gas reduction emissions, and also in some farms where they're actually having to reutilise dead stock, they can actually put that in as well. So much of what the implementation of anaerobic digestion on farm, particularly in Australia, has been driven through compliance, through odour. So in implementing this technology, we can reduce odour and also decrease pathogens. There's obviously that important central nutrient export and recycling, and also the reduction of herbicide use, particularly in when we're using biofertilizers. And that's been seen in some studies where organic material can actually reduce the need of herbicide use. But if we look at it just from a silo point of view of the agricultural sector, it's important to know that many of the regions that have agricultural is important for rural revitalisation, and that's an important point for an Australian perspective. And coming from Toowoomba region, we're home to a very large agricultural sector, and from where I am in Toowoomba, we're on the doorstep of multiple sectors there. But importantly, by working with the municipal, local councils, and I've worked with Toowoomba Regional Council in that regard to understand what it might look like in terms of that co-location of industries to actually have local biomass imports as well. So that basically pieces together what farm energy independence may look like and does look like in some circumstances, and I'll talk about them soon then. But basically it's where you've got agricultural residues used to generate energy for which they will feed the farm and its activities, including the machinery. So if I go to some more tangible examples, I've got here on this slide a concept called, which has actually been trademarked, biogas done right. It comes from my colleagues from Italy, which is basically showing that there's potential for expanding sustainable biogas production and some of the possible impacts. And so again, it has this, wrong one. Ooh. I think I pressed the wrong one there. Might need to have some. There we go. I'm just pressing around. Oh, what I was trying to look for was that. The central component is the AD system, which is going to produce electricity, and when upgraded to my biomethane, direct injection into the grid. We in Australia don't actually have direct injection, but I'm very aware of the Sydney Water's demonstration plant, which is with Malabar, and that represents Australia's first work into actually upgrading and looking at the possibility of direct injection of biomethane in the grid. We also have the ability to be able to, in the European case, is to actually use the digestate to produce fertiliser on the principal crop, but also to have a double cropping mechanism whereby the energy crops and residues can actually flow back in. And of course that repeats the cycle so that we get food for human consumption and then completes the cycle again. Some of the work that I've done over the last decade with my colleagues with Task 37 has included looking at how anaerobic digestion is integrated into the farming system, and so I've co-authored a report that was published back in 2020 looking at that very fact. And it's quite a powerful report in the fact that it shows how what each country, including Australia, Canada, Italy and UK, are doing in that regard. And it shows how more, how developed we are, and also importantly the policies for which support that. So in many of what we're doing in Australia, yes, our farming practices might be different. However, there is a lot of room for improvement if we looked toward our international neighbours and see how things are working there. But what I also want to talk about, and it's a very wordy slide, I apologise, but this is really coming in from a more integrated approach. Now, I'm Director of Centre for Agriculture Engineering, and we do a lot more work than just bioenergy. It's around irrigation, water management, automation, robotics, farming systems innovation, which actually includes a lot of precision agriculture. And so for the farming sector to actually reduce emissions and become more sustainable, they need an integrated approach which involves all of those. So if we talk about those things, of course, that diagram before showed how we can actually have biomethane from animal manure to actually go into the machinery on tractors, how we can use double cropping for first the primary crop and then the secondary lay crop. Then we're talking about actually covering the soils to avoid erosion, so we do a fair bit of work in the centre around what that looks like, because that can enhance soil structure and organic carbon content. There's also a shift from deep ploughing and chemical fertilisation to precision farming with minimum till or no till to conserve soil carbon and soil moisture. And then from that bioenergy system, of course, as mentioned, the use of digestate. There's also the optimisation of fertiliser through drip fertigation, and then also the use of rotation of legumes to fix nitrogen and temporary grass to reduce nitrous oxide emissions. So we're not just thinking about a singular technology, but a largely integration of technologies. And if we were to look at even replacing diesel in a tractor, we can, through biomethane, it's 80% lower emissions compared to diesel tractor. So it is really about the integration of technologies, just not one singular one. But however, I did show you how the AD is an essential component, but with the addition of sequential cropping and also PA, or precision agriculture, you can actually get, I was looking at these slides, we used to call this GHG neutral, now it's carbon neutral. I was just only talking to Dana how, the slides I presented here, this is probably about nearly 10 years old, but it becomes relevant even now. And so much of what I was presenting before was actually with my international audience. So just a couple of examples where this is actually happening in the world. So here is the farm that I mentioned about Italy, La Bellota, and that's what they call a sustainable agro-energetic farm. And she loved the title, agro-energetic. And it's where they're actually combining some solar that was placed on the farm in 2008. It was 180 kilowatts back then. And in 2010, that was now nearly 15 years ago, they installed a 1 megawatt biogas cogen plant from biomass. That's quite large. When you think about the majority of the German biogas plants, 85% of those ag-related are about the sweet spot of 500 kilowatts. The digestate is utilised fully to cover the farm's needs. And then from 2010 onwards, now that's some time ago, there was New Holland partnered with Aboda for the development of energy independent farm concepts. And that's only increased more. Like I was in Finland in 2018 and saw a New Holland or C&H tractor being utilised on farm there. So it's quite, and it was actually quite nice in the conference about in July in Toowoomba, a Renewables and Agriculture conference. I actually saw a C&H rep who was actually talking about biomethane in Australia for his tractors, and I thought, there you go. Hopefully it will happen in my lifetime as a researcher. And as I mentioned that previous slide, that was a concept tractor back then, but they're now fully utilised, has the ability 80% lower emissions compared to standard diesel. And now for Australia, who runs entirely on diesel on farm, that's going to create a large reduction of emissions in agriculture. Another quick summary for a case study in the UK is Wick Farms, and that's a wholly sustainable working farm which utilises an AD plant, and that is made with much of these smaller digesters, but it is around to have CHP, combined heat and power, and actually has electricity distributed to the grid network, and also the cheese processing plant. And then through the various phases, they were including upgrade to biomethane, and the last one was to actually fuel the farmers' milk transport fleet and other vehicles. I think that's pretty cool. But there's hope on the horizon. This is just last year. I was interested to see that at the ABARES conference in Canberra, biogas actually got mentioned in a national conference, and particularly if it's in Canberra, I think then at least the pollies are listening or taking note. So they actually have recognised that the emissions reductions for an on-farm technology does include biogas capture and waste management, even though our sector like the piggery pork industry has been doing it for some time. So I just point to that international case study which I put up as a story for the IEA. That was back in 2018. I thought it'd be a really good idea to showcase some of the great work that our pork sector has been doing in this regard. And look, we come from a very cost-effective, very simple approach. And for many of my international colleagues, they'll say, wow, you know, that covering a, basically what they think is a dam with HDPE covers is actually pretty simple, but it's the way that it works for Australia, because we need to have that simple, cost-effective technology, because capital is the thing that kills us in any of the technology if we're going to implement circular economy practices. So just with that, I'd like to thank you very much for your time and listening, and I look forward to the discussion with you, Lisa.
Before you leave, Bernadette, thank you so much. I'm going to give you this plaque in appreciation of this plaque in appreciation for your attendance and insights, which I know everyone's enjoyed. So do you want a quick photo? Thanks, Bernadette. Yeah, and I'll see you in a second because we've got our panel, of course, and we'll have your chance.